All right, welcome to the Shot by Shot podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Oscar, Ryan, and Will. Today, we're going to be talking about what I think we can all agree is the biggest cinematic event of the year, Barbenheimer. The first time, at least I can remember in many years, where we saw not one, but two hit movies released in the same weekend with Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer and Greta Gerwig's Barbie. So, yeah, obviously we have a lot to talk about this episode. Let's get right into it. So, I guess to start off, just how did, for the rest of you, what were your theater experiences like? And, what made this weekend such a landmark cinematic event compared to anything we've experienced in recent years?
I'll go first. So I went down to London, which I haven't done in a while actually, by myself, because I got to see Oppenheimer in 70mm, which was the main reason I went down. Not IMAX though, but it was still incredible. I saw Barbie first. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it, but theatre experience was pretty solid. There was a lot of people laughing, which does get a tad annoying sometimes when it's at every single joke. But it was a small cinema. It was quite nice, to be honest. Then Oppenheimer was the complete opposite. 800 people cinema. Every single seat sold out. Theatre was just shaking the entire time. I'll get into kind of my review kind of a bit down the line, but that was just absolutely incredible. Probably best theatre experience of my life, to be honest. It was unbelievable. And I'm still exhausted to this day.
Yeah, it's definitely a full body experience. I also managed to catch it in IMAX. I forewent the Barbenheimer experience because I wanted to see it in IMAX, and I couldn't get IMAX seats that connected with my Barbie screening. So I saw Barbie a day before Oppenheimer, but nonetheless, I saw Oppenheimer in IMAX. Same thing, absolutely packed. Every single seat, shoulder to shoulder, everyone was packed in there, and a really responsive crowd. You could hear some sonic reactions to some of the moments throughout the movie. Yeah, definitely the most packed movie theater I've been in maybe ever. So definitely a blockbuster event of the summer and very uncomparable to anything I've ever experienced in the past.
Yeah, I think it was maybe the same. I think it definitely was up there with some of the best theatrical experiences I've had. I didn't get to see it in IMAX the first time. It was just 70mm. But yeah, it was a 300 plus theater. It was completely packed, which is always great to see. I went to see Barbie first at a different theatre, but it was still pretty full. It was a pretty early screening, so but it was mostly full of children. Obviously, it did affect my experience with Barbie a bit, but I didn't love the film either, but it probably did hurt it a bit. And then I went to see Oppenheimer last. Yeah, it was in 70mm. That was definitely, it was simultaneously maybe the best. The film was the best maybe that I've seen in theatre, but it was a proper musical theatre. It was a independent theatre. So the seats are the most uncomfortable experience I've ever had. 30 minutes into it, I did not deal with the seats anymore. I could even cross my legs. So that was a really bad experience in that part. But yeah, it was good overall seeing everybody dressed up going to the theatres. Probably haven't seen it that busy since No Way Home. So it was really nice to see it packed again.
Yeah, so personally, I think the weekend is exactly what cinema is all about. And I think, in the future to really get people out to the theaters, that the studios or whoever is going to really need to create a cinematic event on this level, because I think it really changes the entire mindset of the audience going into it when there's something that's an event like this with the anticipation, the excitement that the audience brings into the theater compared to, your regular weekly screening. And so for me, Thursday night, I saw a 1 a.m. show of Oppenheimer 70mm IMAX. I was coming back from New York, so I didn't get back from New York until 11, then went out to see Oppenheimer. I'm curious, did anyone get these celluloid strips apparently they were giving out? Because I heard they were giving out 3 frames of film.
On Twitter.
Yeah. At my cinema, they were giving out to the first 100 people of the day, and there was a showing before me, so definitely not.
Because I saw it twice in IMAX 70mm. I didn't get shit, so I thought that they were giving it out. But, so I saw it, loved it. And then the next day I did a triple header where I first went to, I saw Toy Story for the Disney 100th anniversary. And that was on Friday now, so it was just so clear. I hadn't seen the theaters, because I'm in the theater 6 days a week, so I'm always seeing them, how they are. And I hadn't seen just mobs of people like this, in a long time. And then I saw Barbie after that, and then I saw Oppenheimer once again. And yeah, I saw in between shows, I was popping in and out to the other theaters, just seeing how crowded it was, seeing how the audience was receiving certain scenes. And yeah, like everyone else is saying, very little empty seats. And yeah, it was just a true cinematic experience where, kind of like what Ryan said, I hate having to sit next to people in tight spaces, especially with my ADHD. I like to move around freely. But I think Oppenheimer was just such a great experience that once I got a little into the film, I wasn't really as focused on that because it was just truly one of those real memorable cinematic experiences where even if people won't love the film, it's something for either of them. It's going to be a memorable experience for them because of what an event this was. So I'm curious, what do you think, for the three of you and the audience at home? Do you think that now this is going to lead to the studios start, doing more same day releases and doing more kind of double headers and trying to create these cinematic events of multiple films in the same weekend?
I hope so.
Yeah,
But I think it's difficult because with Barbie and Oppenheimer, the kind of real pull was kind of the clash of like completely different tones and genres of the film, and it obviously created a lot of online buzz. And I think if that's going to happen, they're going to have to pull out two films that are almost like that, because I think there's a risk of putting two on the same day and like one just completely bombing. So yeah, I think I would really like to see that again, absolutely, but there's a massive risk to it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think given the success of Barbenheimer, I think studios are going to try to recreate this. And I think it's going to be almost bad how many double headers we get in the next couple of years, given the success. But Oscar's totally right. I think the reason Oppenheimer works so perfectly is because it's a complete tonal juxtaposition. Like, there's something for everyone in both these movies. And it was catered in a way where it was like, which movie are you seeing? Not, are you going to see a movie per se? So it just kind of brought everyone out to the movie theaters, and you just kind of saw the other one by association, I guess. So yeah, I think we're definitely going to see this in the future and in years to come for sure.
Yeah, I think I'll try it, but I don't know if I want to see it because stuff like this has to be generated naturally. Like, it still started in like small like film circles, and then it's like slowly spread out to like the public, and they're just gonna try and force it. And I don't. I just don't think you ever get a double feature like this, where like you get two films of this quality coming out in the same. Well, not that I think Barbie's like that high quality, but it's a big film. It's a big
Acclaimed directors.
Yeah, you're never gonna get a Greta Gerwig and a Christopher Nolan to maybe even agree again to do this, because it wasn't as if this was planned. Like, it was maybe even like getting a dig in at Christopher Nolan as well, because Warner Brothers were annoyed that he left them after Tenet, so it was kind of the like screw you to Nolan, which really backfired as well. But yeah, see, not all they try to do it with like Saw 10 and Paw Patrol, and there's no way I'm seeing Paw Patrol, just a feature.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're totally right. But I also had a question. I was going to say, at what point in the advertising campaign do you think both movies were like, okay, we got to collab here? Because I don't think it was like started from the jump. Like, I think it happened organically, like you said, Ryan. So like, at what point did you think that they were like, okay, let's just merge the marketing here? Because they definitely did. Like, there was joint marketing stints during the end of it.
Didn't they tried to get Barbie to move like just recently?
Really? No, I didn't know that.
There were like risks. If I heard like Oppenheimer was going to be moved to December a couple months back, there was risks against that. But yeah, it is a really interesting one.
And it sounds like they landed on the same day, and a complete success. But I think we can jump right into the review, unless someone had something else to say.
I guess the only other thing I would say is that I think that films like Mission Impossible, for example, are really regretting where they chose to release their film, not just because of how they were pushed out of IMAXs, but I think the amount of people who haven't been to the movie theater in a while, who are now coming back because of these two films, are going to be hungry for another type of cinematic experience like this. And I think if they released Mission Impossible 2 weeks after, let's say, it would have done, not only would have not lost the screens from Oppenheimer and Barbie, but it would have gotten even more people who are just hungry for another cinematic experience. So I think the fact that the schedule's looking pretty dry upcoming is something that a lot of these studios are going to end up regretting. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, right into it.
Looking at August, and there's like nothing coming out. So obviously there would have been still like Barbie and Oppenheimer like coming towards the end of theirs, but they would have had a free run at the whole month.
Meg 2's coming out. Can't forget that.
Yeah, sorry, forgot about that one.
And Gran Turismo, of course.
That I'm going to see Gran Turismo.
Based on a true story.
I've heard pretty good things about it so far from people that have seen it already.
I'm skeptical, cautiously optimistic for this one.
All right, let's
But
get right.
we'll save that for another day.
So I guess I'll start by saying I think I probably had a more unique experience with Oppenheimer for most people because I didn't watch a single trailer. I didn't follow any of the promotional. I actually 1 week before it was in the theater all relaxed, and all of a sudden I heard something about a bomb and Nazis. And as soon as I heard it, I knew it was Oppenheimer. I've never pulled my headphones out so quickly. First song I could find on Apple Music, just blast the song. So I didn't know anything going in. Like when I learned Matt Damon was in this movie, when Matt Damon showed up in the movie, I knew Cillian Murphy was the lead, and I knew that Robert Downey Jr. was in it in some way. That's literally and Christopher Nolan directed. Other than that, I knew absolutely nothing. So for me, I was kind of always learning a lot of things the audience might have known as I was watching the film. But I think that it's very important to talk about, where this is in Christopher Nolan's filmography. I do think it's a magnum opus of his. And I think that I see it as a true culmination of his entire career. I see in this film traits of every prior film that he's made, whether it's, the black and white versus the subjective black and white versus objective black and white versus subjective color. We saw Memento. And then, you have you die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain from The Dark Knight. We have kind of those elements of fear from Batman Begins, the kind of layering of, scenes within scenes and the surrealism from Inception, the use of science and like this obsessiveness with science that leads to family neglect that we saw in Interstellar, the kind of tragic effects of war from Dunkirk. And I really think just if you go down Christopher Nolan's filmography in this one, you see elements of really all of his work. And also, I think, obviously, we know the situation with Tenet where it was released same day and did his partnership with Warner Brothers. But I think that Christopher Nolan, because we have to remember, even though theaters are doing well now, he wrote the film probably around 2020, 2021 when there was a lot of uncertainty about the future with movie theaters. So I think he wanted to give people the grandest possible cinematic experience and, really showcase why movies not only need to be seen, but be seen in theaters, and gave us a film, like I said, like no CGI also, but also making it as if it were his last. Like if movie theaters were to go away, there was a possibility that this could maybe even be his last film with a wide theatrical release. So I think he really treated this as a magnum opus, and even though it won't be his last film, I think he treated it as if it would be. So I'm curious what the rest of you think about, where this fits into Christopher Nolan's filmography and, how he's evolved as a director to this point.
Yeah, I think he's a man that's really hard to hate, especially someone that's such an advocate for trying to maintain the cinema experience and make his films practically stretch them as far as they can without using CGI. I thought it was really impressive how he didn't use any CGI in this. And a big complaint that I usually have with his films, because for a while I wasn't a big Christopher Nolan fan. Maybe 2 years ago I done the Tenet, Dunkirk back to back. I started to see a lot of problems with him, mainly his character work. It's often quite one-dimensional, and I thought that was why I think Oppenheimer is by far his best film of his career so far. Because I think the biopic structure allowed them to create not just a technical masterpiece, but also create a deep character study within that. Clearly, he's number one for me so far. And yeah, as you said, I felt like it was a combination of all the skills that he'd learned through his career with the objective, subjective, and the mental, like Alex said. And a big part of it that I loved was returning to physics like he did in Interstellar, because he also has a deep personal interest in it. And those were some of my favourite parts of the film, where he was in bed, seeing particles and explosions in his head. And yeah, it's just so crazy, filmmaking that he was able to do, without using CGI and that. I'm so intrigued to see how he actually made those parts of the film. But yeah, that's probably the biggest compliment I can give him for this, that I miss studying physics after watching this film.
Yeah, make physics looks interesting for 3 hours. Yeah, Oscar, where do you have it in your Nolan ranking?
I've only seen it once, but tomorrow night will be my second in IMAX, which I'm very, very excited for. But right now, this is definitely number one for me. I was kind of sitting on it for a bit between that and The Dark Knight, and I kind of settled on it ahead of it. I haven't rewatched The Dark Knight in a while, though, and I would like to. And honestly, I do think it could drop down a bit. But yeah, this is, like everyone said already, for me, definitely his magnum opus. even from like the non-linear storytelling that we've seen in like Tenet and things like that from last time. He just kind of built on that. And here, and I know kind of for a lot of people it will be quite hard to follow because it moves quite quickly between scenes, kind of back and forth. But I thought that's why it was so engaging, to be honest. Especially in that last 40 minutes where you kind of get quite a shift in what's happening after the Trinity test happens. But that was so engaging, kind of everything is behind. And even though he kind of throws in a couple twists in that kind of last act, which is kind of very Nolan, I thought that worked really well. But yeah, this is just unbelievable through and through, technical masterpiece. I think this is probably one of the greatest supporting ensembles I've ever seen. Like every supporting actor had their moment to shine. No one was kind of hiding and putting just excellent performance after excellent performance.
Yeah, for sure. Like the ensemble cast, that was a really good point. Like everyone put in absolute shift in this movie. But yeah, in terms of my Nolan ranking, again, like it's in the top third guaranteed. It's kind of fighting between the 1, 2, and 3 spots for me. I've seen it 3 times, and it's gone up and down my scale, honestly. But every time I've seen it, I've grown more intrigued, and I've learned more about the movie. So I think it's one of those that definitely warrants a second, third watch, just because it's so dense. Like it's easily Nolan's most dense film in terms of dialogue. It's like a 3-hour movie, but like the screenplay's got to be 200 plus pages. Like there are just so many words spoken in such little time. So there's just a lot that I feel like I missed in the first viewing, and the second and third viewing it definitely picked up and really helped that third act really hit home. But yeah, Oppenheimer definitely Nolan's among his best work. It's a fusion of all of his best techniques and tropes from his entire filmography, and he blends them pretty beautifully here. So yeah, again, no problem calling this his magnum opus. Definitely falls in the top third, maybe even best Nolan film.
Yeah, I would agree. I also personally would rank it as my number 1 Christopher Nolan film. I really agree with what Ryan said about, even though I have a lot of respect for Christopher Nolan as an artist and a lot of the approaches he takes to his filmmaking, his characters I do often find one-dimensional as well, and I think this is the first time he's really dived into a deep character study. I also really appreciate because I personally prefer films that ask the audience questions rather than make statements. I mean, obviously, there's good films that do both, but generally speaking, I like films that ask questions. And it's such a complex character, such as Oppenheimer. I think Christopher Nolan really understands the impossibility of finding the truth and the kind of Rashomon situation of it, and really plays around with the subjective versus objective with that. But I also think, he really doesn't pass judgment on the character. And I think a lot of reviews I've seen kind of have, Oppenheimer did a good thing for the world, he did a bad thing for the world, he's a bad guy. But I think these are all, us as the audience are constantly judging him, but I don't think Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker judges him. I think he treats him very fairly and presents both sides of the argument and really kind of gets us into his head, which is also an interesting mindset because most people are not scientific geniuses or really that knowledgeable about science. Like I personally barely know anything about science. And he really kind of explores the mind of the scientific mind through this film, and the always trying to disprove each other, and the element of just needing to consider every possibility, which obviously arises a lot of the conflicts with the military and the politicians and the courts and all of that. And I think he's a character who just needs to consider all the possibilities, and it causes a lot of conflict for him, which I think makes for some very good cinematic drama. And I think also we never really know what Oppenheimer's motive is either. Like, does he want the glory? Does he want the scientific achievement? Does he think this will accomplish world peace? So there's just so many layers and questions to this character, which I find so interesting. And really, he's the type, I feel like every person's going to look at the character and have their own interpretation. So I'm curious what you guys think of Oppenheimer as a character, and the layering and the character development, all of these types of things.
Yeah, I think it's by far his best written film, and Oppenheimer is probably his best written character. I think there's kind of scenes that like stood out. Well, obviously we're going to spoilers now, But there's a scene where Florence Pugh's character ends up killing herself, and I picked up on this. You guys probably did, but there's you see quickly a black hand that's like pressing down on the back of her head into the water, and I think that was just a really clever way, because just adding to his character how he thought that he was responsible for her death, and it's just like small details like that which I think like easily people could just miss, but it's really necessary, to be honest. And I think that's such a step forward for him in like Nolan as a writer, like character development, because I think, like you guys have been saying, he definitely over the years does lack in his writing.
Yeah, I'd kind of piggyback on the statement that Nolan, like, I don't know, I wouldn't call him a bad writer. Like, I think the writing is definitely a solid component of his filmmaking. Sometimes it gets a little confusing or a little messy. But I think in Oppenheimer, it really didn't. It was a pretty introspective piece on Oppenheimer, and it was really about him. Although the ensemble cast kind of does a really good job of balancing these other important characters, we're really with Oppenheimer for the entire duration. It's about him and his perspective on the war, how he's feeling. And again, like kind of what Alex said, that Nolan doesn't really present like a lenience here. He presents the fact that Oppenheimer was once a communist and still has maybe some communist ties or policies that he believes in. But it never like jams it down your throat that Oppenheimer was or wasn't a communist. And just in the like overall political message of the entire thing, again, same, like it wasn't, this was for good or for bad necessarily. It just gives you the entire story, and you can derive your own opinion based on the perspective. But it's not like a Quentin Tarantino historical revision history type movie. You know, it's pretty historically accurate, and it's a well-written character piece about a pretty important historical figure in Oppenheimer. And you can tell that Nolan did the research, because it is a very intricately written and introspective piece, for sure.
Yeah, some good points. I really liked how he focused on the character rather than, I think people might have walked into this thinking they would have been focusing on like, Japan or the actual bombing. But yeah, it's very much a deep character study on Robert Oppenheimer. And I just really like how he develops through the movie. Like at the start, we see him as a student at university. Yeah, he's just got a lot of knowledge and desire to explore quantum mechanics and like bring revolutionary physics to the world. And for a lot of the film, as he's learning physics and bringing everybody onto the project, he like convinces himself that what he's doing is correct and that it'll all work out eventually, and that he kind of ignores like the war part of it, and he just like hopes that his weapons won't be used for bad stuff like that, and he just has the innate desire to like break boundaries in science and like prove these theories that can be applied into like the real world, and he doesn't really think that they're going to use after that. And I think just the realization that after the Trinity test, and they see the horrors of like what they've done in Hiroshima, and it's so heartbreaking, that scene when he's in front of like the crowd, and you can see him coming to the realization of like what like his creations have done to the world, and like what the rest of it, what's possibly going to happen for the rest of the time. And it's just some phenomenal filmmaking with like the sound, like we hear a little girl scream and just everybody goes silent, and all we hear is the footsteps. It's almost like a horror film at times. But yeah, it's just a great change of the character throughout the whole film, and I really like where these arc led to them. What did you think, Alex?
Yeah, so I think one thing he really plays around with is, obviously we see Christopher Nolan himself has called Oppenheimer the most important person in history. And we know for a fact that he greatly changed the world. But we see then in the third act, him judged based on, things from before the atomic bomb was dropped. And I find it really interesting how the character of Oppenheimer is judged based on his actions from before that, because obviously the world's changed so much. We know that people change, but yet even though the world's changed, they treat it as if he hasn't changed. And I know Will said that he was a communist earlier, but I think, we really don't actually even know if he's a communist. I think you could also argue he just has fascinations with the ideology. You could be even argue that he just was really in love with Florence Pugh. Or that it was
like the outline. There's never a moment where they say he's a communist,
Yeah, never. And I think personally, my interpretations, I think he's the type of character who, he knows the endless possibilities of the world, and he's going to seek out all the information, see every possible possibility. And I think just because of that curiosity of his mindset, it ends up being sort of like a downfall to him, because he then is dealing with people who kind of don't want him to have this curiosity about, the communist ideology, for example. And then he's then judged based on his actions from before the world changed, even though obviously we know that people can change. And it's even just like the exact things he said that they keep quoting him on in some of those hearings, where it's really, if you look at it, not fair, because it's just such old statements from a very different world. Also, I know Will touched on, how his style of writing is definitely developed a lot with this one. And I definitely agree. I think Chris Nolan typically is much about real strong conflicts over character. And often there's kind of these two competing conflicts, with this one being Oppenheimer's point of view versus Robert Downey Jr.'s character's point of view. And I think he still brings those strong conflicts, but at the same time, there's a deep character element to it. And I feel like that conflict is very internal with the character as well. I think he doesn't even, my favorite quote of the film probably is when Benny Safdie's character says, "Nobody knows what you believe, do you?" Because I think even Oppenheimer doesn't truly know what he believes as a character, which I think makes for a very interesting character in terms of a case study. But
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I think like each act has like a pretty distinct tonal shift in like the mindset of Oppenheimer, in my opinion. Like at the beginning, he's kind of just like naive, right? He's willing to do anything in the name of science just to kind of get his name out there, just to be on the cutting edge. And then you can see it when the Albert Einstein scenes. Albert Einstein's a bit more respected. Like he understands what's going on. He's not as naive to how cutting edge the science they're working on. So Oppenheimer slowly progresses towards the Trinity test. He slowly progresses more and more as a scientist and as like a member of society who knows this is going to happen. So he has like a closer relation to the bomb, I think. And I just think that development of knowing what's going to happen from Oppenheimer is so perfectly done, from this whimsical kid who has no idea the impact of his science to the meddled Oppenheimer who realizes that he's changed the world for good or for bad. I think that was a beautiful character arc that was woven through the 3 acts pretty seamlessly, I thought.
Yeah, I think I actually touched on, I definitely think they very subtly evolve the character too. There's never like these big like kind of character turning point moments where his mentality shifts. I think they do it very subtly. But one thing you touched on, which I think is really interesting that Chris Nolan makes us very aware of, is despite the fact that we're dealing with these huge changes in history, there's always this very personal element to the changes. And we see this, like the fact that Los Alamos, it was a place where he would go on trips with his brother. And I think probably the biggest one is when the one politician, I forget who it was, I forget if it was a politician or a general, but he's like, yeah, we're not going to bomb this city. Me and my wife honeymoon there. And it's like, even though it's like these are world-changing decisions, people who actually are the ones making them, it actually comes from, a very personal level, which a lot of people, I think, forget about when they read the history books, that some things are just as simple as, oh, well, the guy's honeymoons with his wife there. And I think Christopher Nolan does a great job of making us aware that these characters are still human and there is very human factors in the decisions.
Yeah, I think that decision, the dialogue with what the general said was much, much better than just showing what happened to Japan. I think there's so much more effective way, and it keeps it more grounded rather than trying to show us all the things that that don't necessarily need to be in there, even though they're relevant to the story. And I do think it would have been actually wrong to include what happened to Japan in the film, but I think that dialogue was like, my cinema gasped when that happened. It got kind of like shocked laughs just because of what he said.
Yeah, I would say, because I know you just talked about how we don't see Japan, and I think I also heard that Chris Nolan wrote the script in first person, which is very rare for people to do. And I think, it reminds us that this is a film about Oppenheimer as a person, and it is a true character study where, all the people in America at the time, no one saw what happened to Japan in that moment. Everyone heard it on the radio, just like the way we experienced it. And Oppenheimer himself didn't see, they cut ties with him once the bomb's done. So I think they really put us in the shoes of Oppenheimer and the American people of the time, where, what he saw was the testing of the bomb, not the actual bombing itself. That the kind of horror of that was not something that the characters subjectively witnessed. So I think it was a very interesting decision that he chose to not show us that, which I think most of us probably expected to see going into the theater.
Yeah, and I think that was honestly a good decision to not give these differing perspectives. Like I saw some social media discourse saying that one of the gripes with the film was that they didn't provide enough ulterior perspectives. But I think that was one of the things that made it so great. Like, it's an extremely intimate character piece. Like, you didn't need side characters to have these big, influential roles. It's about Oppenheimer and his relationship with the project that he's working on, right? It's about the Manhattan Project. It's not about, how the Japanese were impacted by the atomic bomb. I'm sure there's plenty of other movies about that, or, the people working around Oppenheimer, or the indigenous people that lived in Los Alamos. But I don't know. I think the focus was Oppenheimer. The movie was always Oppenheimer. It never got off the rails. And I loved how it was always in his mind. You were always behind the eyes of Oppenheimer. And I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think that's a big point we made, is a lot of people didn't know, maybe just didn't go into expecting it to be about Oppenheimer, but they definitely just didn't get that it was from his perspective, like for the indigenous people. I've seen a lot of people saying they should have been talking about that, but he would not have known about that or cared about that at the time, so it's not something that we need to see again in Japan. We don't need to see that. And what did you think about the Trinity test as well? Because I expected it to be quite a big, grand explosion, but I really liked how it ended up being, because I think you're running a risk of like glorifying maybe like the atrocities that ended up being if you make it this big, noisy, like really cool explosion. I really liked how it was just silent and you had to sit there in the empty theater, just contemplating like the horrors that you were seeing on screen. What did you like that test?
Yeah, I thought it was perfectly executed. Kind of that 5-minute build up of the score just getting louder and louder and louder. I've listened to that score so much, and then just like 2 minutes of just nothing. My theater just you could just hit nothing for that 2 minutes, just hit kind of out of nowhere. I don't know why, but it's really, really unexpected, even though obviously it's quite an obvious thing, speed of sound, but I didn't expect that, and it was so much more effective.
Yeah, like it makes sense, right? Like you wouldn't hear or feel the explosion for a little bit because of the speed of sound. So it makes sense in the physical sense because Nolan is that perfectionist, and it makes sense in the artistic sense where you're just kind of left with this moment of thought, and like almost you're just gasping, really. Like my jaw was on the floor. I was completely enamored. It was so perfectly done. And then you're completely thrown back into your seat when the explosion does hit, because that was like the biggest jump scare of the year for me. I don't know about you guys, but I freaking jumped.
Yeah, I think the whole explosion sequence, I think, is truly one of the greatest cinematic climaxes I've ever witnessed in film. I think Christopher Nolan is not necessarily much of a visual storyteller. He has his moments where he is, but generally speaking, his films are very dialogue heavy, and I don't think he necessarily has, the cinematography, like every frame's a painting type of approach. But what I think he is a true master of auditory filmmaking and just the way he uses sound and music. And I think he did such a great job of, before the bomb, seeing those tests where, actually I quickly want to mention that I think it's very interesting how you would think that Hitler dying would be like a big, like, climactic moment in the story, but we don't see a single bomb test until after Hitler died, which really makes you question a lot of things, because it was like, not only it's like, did they have the bomb and dropped it after, like the whole development happened after Hitler died, where the whole motive originally was they were worried that Hitler would get the bomb first. It really makes you question a lot of things. But in terms of creating that climax, I think, we had all those mini explosions where we would see it, and then there was always a delayed reaction that was very loud in terms of the sound. So I think by the time we get to the big explosion, we're all kind of just waiting for that, like, deafening sound. Like, I was even kind of like getting my ears ready, like, oh wow, like this is going to be like, this might hurt my ears. And you're just kind of waiting for it. And then when he hits it, it's just silent. And then you're just really he's letting that fear just linger in you. Like, there's so much kind of fear he's trying to create. And I feel like the audience was kind of just fearing what that sound was going to be and how big it was going to sound, and, the spike in it, which just was not coming. And then it lingers to the point where you kind of forget about it to create that jump scare. So I think he did an incredible job just with the sound design and building to that climax. Also, it's worth noting that we live in a world where we have these blockbusters constantly, like Marvel movies, which are just explosion here, explosion there. And here we have a film which is actually about explosions that is treated with just such respect and care to that explosion, unlike what we've become used to. And even using silence rather than loud noise to really create the effect.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point there, Alex, about Nolan as an artistic filmmaker, and Oppenheimer really being this at his full capacity as an artistic filmmaker. In the past, Nolan kind of leans into his dialogue or his story, not really focusing on some of the artistic aspects, you could say. They take a little bit of a backseat. But in Oppenheimer, there are some beautiful visual moments, and those beams of light that just kind of circle around the frame, or those fiery little ashes that from time to time just burn up the frame. It's just really, really carefully detailed in there. And I think Nolan definitely showed that he is a craftsman, and he's definitely an artistic filmmaker, and he knows where to put the camera in moments of anticipation. And he's not just a conversation editor or a conversation creator, but he can create these environments and these entrancing, beautiful, frames essentially. But yeah, Nolan, well done. Well done.
Yeah, a big part of the explosion that I really liked was you're sitting there for silence, and then the quote comes up, and it kind of takes you out of it, and you're thinking about it in your head, and then that's when he hits you with the jump scare of it. It's just scary in the actual theatre. Another part that Alex brought up was about modern blockbusters. Another thing that they do not focus on quite a lot is the score of the film, and the soundtrack, which is maybe one of Nolan's best, by Ludwig Göransson. Maybe I will take it may be better than any of Hans Zimmer's scores that he's done for Nolan. Maybe I don't know if it's better than Stellar, but it may be. But it's definitely my favorite best of thing. Yeah, it's definitely the best of his career, I think.
Yeah, he's done other pretty big ones though. I don't know them off the top of my head. Ludwig Göransson,
Tenet, yeah.
He did Black Panther. He did,
Wakanda Forever.
Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. He did the themes for those, I know.
Yeah,
definitely one of the...
We should really touch on the score here.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to get into next, so...
Yeah, take it away, Alex. How beautiful was this score?
I think it was absolutely incredible, and it was... There were moments where it was beautiful. It's obviously, I think he uses a lot of strings and, violins and those kinds of instruments. But I think even when it's not something that you would necessarily put on in your car and listen to on your own time, it's still, even those kind of pieces are so effective in conveying that emotion. But what it also does is, it's a 3-hour film. And even though I think all of us like 3-hour films and long movies, I think there are a lot of people who are just kind of put off by that. But he makes it such a kind of seamless and kind of quicker feeling experience by the way the score just carries us from scene to scene, and it's almost like the roller coaster of the movie that kind of moves us along and keeps guiding us and keeps us feeling that emotion. And also, it does a great job of making a dialogue heavy film more interesting by making us, at least for me, it definitely made me care about the dialogue and invest more in it than I would have had it just been just watching people talk without the score.
Yeah, I think there's probably a total of 10 seconds where the score isn't playing in this entire thing, and it's during the Trinity test. I think I said in my review that the score is absolutely the heartbeat of the film. It dictates the pace, and it pushes you through the entire film. First act, second act, third act. And the pace of the score matches the pace of the dialogue of the screenplay. So you're always matched. Like, you're never out of sync. And I think that is such a perfect quality of this score, which maybe, you could say it's better than some of Interstellar or Inception. So it's got that quality it's just so perfectly paced and integrated. And every single song in the score, like, I kind of disagree. I've been listening to this score just like sitting around, just listen to it. And I think it flows perfectly, characterizes the theme and tonality of each scene. And I'm kind of with Ryan. This might be one of Nolan's best scores, and should definitely be given some flowers here.
Yeah, I think I'm with Will. I've just been listening to the score non-stop, and it's impressive when the score just puts you straight back into the movie when you're not even watching it, and you can just feel the same emotions that you were when you were watching it. I think it's just so impressive, and it's even like impressive because it's just making it so, like, TikTok is just flooded with like things of the score at their own. I think it's really good to see, to be honest, because for kind of film scores for like kind of normal kind of like general film watchers, like they like it in the film, but like I don't think they would listen to it as much kind of just on their own. But I think it's just so nice to see that it's having this kind of effect on general audiences, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm now thinking about the score in my head, and there have been a lot of tracks that I have been listening to since watching the film. So definitely most of it is the type of music that, you could listen to with whether in the car or working out or whatever. Because, I mean, Ludwig Göransson absolutely knocked it out of the park with this one, and it'll be interesting to see when Dune's over if Nolan goes back to Hans Zimmer or continues this collaboration, because I personally think this one's been working great for him. But I think one thing we should probably talk about is the way the music just affects the scene flow and how Christopher Nolan is so good at making the scenes flow into each other really seamlessly. I think it often, he doesn't really use, I think it isn't until his wife finds out about the bomb that we see a transition that's something other than a hard cut. Pretty much all of it is, that's the only time, we kind of see a dip to black, and then after that it's just a hard cut back in. But it's like, all right, now you can kind of calm down for a minute. But yeah, I think he also keeps the scene, even though it's a 3-hour movie, he keeps the scenes very short. And he definitely takes the approach of, which I don't always subscribe to this philosophy, but he does it very well, of arrive late, leave early, where it's, we enter the scene right in the middle of the climactic discussion or whatever it is, and we end like normally on a question, or whether it's a question or like a big informational reveal. There's very little kind of high and by and like those kind of more atmospheric character moments, which I love in a lot of other films, but Nolan does a great job of making the scene flow by just having these quicker scenes that are all at the peak of what the dialogue would be in another film. That's all Christopher Nolan shows you. So I'm curious to think about this
So I'm really glad you brought that up. Really, really glad you brought that up, because I'm meant to say this. It's edited by Jennifer Lame. This should be up for an award for editing. I just have to say, the editing was phenomenal. But her resume is astounding. I just had to bring it up for a sec here. Frances Ha, Paper Towns, Manchester by the Sea, Hereditary, Midsummer, Marriage Story, Tenet, Blonde, Oppenheimer, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Judas and the Black Messiah. She's edited all those films. So I thought the editing was lights out. You're never lingering in a scene. You're never kind of lost. It does move fast, and there is a lot to digest, but it's never a product of the editing. The editing is so perfect, and I'm so glad you shouted that out. So I had to give a name drop to Miss Jennifer Lame. She did an absolute perfect job.
In terms of like the pacing, I think on my first watch, I definitely did think that the third act was maybe not paced perfectly, because it was kind of like a more leaned into like the social network type of like biopic, like come between the scenes, I thought, and it's just not something I think anymore, because I think it was more just in my, like I said, my theater experience, I thought my leg was gonna fall off by this point. Like after the Trinity test, I thought that was like the climax of the film, because I thought we were doing like just watched like a 3-hour film. This felt like a 4-hour film, like on my first watch, but that was mainly just because of the seat. But yeah, on second and third watch, which I have watched now, yeah, it was maybe the third act was like maybe the most fast paced I felt of the whole film, actually. Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, I agree with your comment on second and third watch, the third act feeling a lot faster. I also have seen it 3 times. And the first time I watched it, the third act definitely seemed to be the longest of the 3. But you're totally right when you say on second and third watch, it seemed to be the fastest because of just how fast it flew.
Yeah, everything connects and you have an idea of where everything's going. I think that really helps as well, like on repeat watches. But yeah, I think all of those like problems have disappeared now. Like, I think the movie's pretty much perfect.
We're going to disclose our rating. Nice start, because I think I'm the lowest out of all you guys. 1 out of 4.5. Shocker. It's so bad. No, I got it out of 4.5, 9 out of 10. I've seen it 3 times and I've been teetering on the edge of like 4.5, 5, and it's just like falls so close in that range. It might go up if I develop a closer relationship, if I watch this a bit more. But 4.5 for me. Yeah, not much else can be said. We kind of did the review already, but just a really great film overall.
Watch. It was definitely affected by my theater experience, but yeah, the 70mm in the film, it was probably a low 4.5 actually. Yeah, but on second watch, I took it up really high, up to a high 4.5. I wasn't quite ready to give it the 5 yet, but now that I've now seen it 3 times, and it's definitely a 5 out of 5. I think I've got it in my top 30 with them maybe already. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, they might be top 100 now.
Yeah, this is definitely a 5 out of 5 for me, easily. Could go up even higher, higher at my rankings tomorrow evening. I hope it does. I currently have it like top 50 all time for me, easily number 1 Nolan. I hope to push it higher because it deserves it.
Yeah, for me, I probably rate the most generously of everyone here, but yeah, it's a 5 out of 5 for me as well. My number 1 on my Christopher Nolan rankings. Yeah, loved it. It's also it's neck and neck for my number 1 of the year with Asteroid City. I can't really decide at the moment. They're neck and neck.
I only 1 of the year. I think it's just been Babylon for the decade. I think is that good?
It's number 3 of the decade for me. Bit behind Babylon and June as well, but I think it's going to get right up there tomorrow evening.
Yeah, I don't know where it stacks up in the decade. It's probably top 10 of the decade for me. And probably the second best movie of the year behind Across the Spider-Verse. Yes.
Yeah, for the decade for me, it's an 8-9 range.
Yeah, I think that's probably where it would fall for me. But yeah, Oppenheimer was exquisite. It was excellent. Go see it if you haven't already in IMAX. But I think we're going to go swiftly into Barbie. We won't have such a deep breakdown on Barbie because none of us really developed a super big connection with it. We didn't love it all that much, but we'll do a little review here on the back end of the Oppenheimer episode, give you our thoughts. But maybe we'll start with Ryan. If you wanted to go, give us some Barbie thoughts.
Yeah, I think I'm the lowest here. I'm very down the middle. I can see why people loved it, but it just wasn't really my thing. So probably a high 2.5. Wasn't really we aren't really the target audience, so I didn't have high expectations going into it. And yeah, other than the fact that it was a Greta Gerwig film, that kind of gave me hope. And I think she did save it quite a lot, because there was a lot of fun to be had here. The production design was great. I seen in our Letterboxd video that she had a lot of influence from old Hollywood films. Films I've watched recently, actually, like American Paris and The Mid Shoes, which were known for like their grand set designs and the open colours, and they were almost like stage-like performances in their film. They didn't like shy away from that. She interpreted like fell into like the Barbie Land parts, I think, were really good. But yeah, a major fall-off part, or the part that I thought the film like fell off in quality was when they went to the real world. Yeah, we've seen like clips of this before and it looked terrible. It looked like a car commercial, and I was really hoping that it looked better, but no, it was maybe the most bland and boring like stuff I've seen this year. Maybe it was only like 20 minutes of the film, but like it was a big standout part. Didn't really like any of the stuff in the real world either. Like they were trying to poke fun at themselves. Like the Mattel was like an actual thing in the film. It just really wasn't funny at all. I think this might be a hot take, but Will Ferrell was terrible in it. He may have to just retire. Like, the man hasn't been funny in like a decade now. I know people love him from these old films, but he's not been done anything good recently.
No, I think I can co-sign that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and at least like the scenes like going from Barbie Land to the real world were good. Like I seen they were actually shot practically.
Yeah, the behind the scenes were really, really cool.
It is, but nobody else would have done it. I don't think if they'd like directed it, so we have to give it credit for where it's true. I also felt like most of the performances were pretty good, particularly Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling. I think that was the perfect casting for both of them. I don't think they could have done a better job with that. And of course, it's always nice to see Michael Cera in the movie. He was one of my favourites in the whole film. Yeah, overall, yeah, it's a high 2.5. It's not a bad film by any means, but it's a bit worrying where this might lead to in like future films, because we're not going to have Greta Gerwig making them. So maybe there's a possibility they're just going to be more than like large scale product advertisements if they're just going to keep making these like toy movies. So it's a bit worrying. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Barbie.
Yeah, I'm kind of around the same. I put one up to like a low 3 stars. It was at a 2.5, but I'm a bit higher on it. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. Kind of in the middle. I thought the second act in the real world was generally horrendous. The cinematography was just really, really bad. And I kind of got worried because I thought they were going to stay in that real world for literally the entirety rest of the film. I was like, nah, this is just not good. I'm happy they went back because I feel the whole film just felt like directionless, to be honest. It lacks kind of a strong key focus throughout. I really like America Ferrera. That's the actor I want to shout out. I thought she did a really, really good job. But yeah, Ryan Gosling, easily my favorite parts of the film. I thought the kind of dancing scenes, the music scenes in the last act were really, really brilliant. Some generally laugh out loud moments, but I think the comedy as a whole was like either really hit or really missed for me. I think kind of the screenplay as a whole, I agreed with what the film was trying to convey in kind of in a kind of really good way, but I do think it could have been done in a more subtle way, to be honest. I think it kind of hit you like the first couple scenes, and obviously kind of we were the target audience for that, and it's really important on womanhood and things like that. But I do think it was quite on the nose, and I think for I obviously can't like massively comment on it, but I think it would have been better if it done in kind of a more subtle way.
Yeah, I totally agree with Oscar, and I'm going to echo everything he said. I gave it a 2.5 off ripped. It grew on me a little bit, bumped it up to a 3. Didn't love it, didn't hate it, but I definitely thought that it wasn't great. Like, when I come to a Greta Gerwig film, I'm here for cinema. You know, like Little Woman and Lady Bird are exceptional films, so I was expecting something on that caliber. Maybe that's me for setting my expectations sky high, but it just wasn't what I was looking for. Yeah, it's a feminist comedy, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But I think, yeah, it was just really in your face, and for what it was all right, and wasn't specifically for me. Again, I wasn't in the target demographic, obviously, but I still had a good time with it. There were definitely some funny moments. But yeah, not much to be said about Barbie for me. Just kind of a middle of the road film, a little plasticky. Didn't really like the Mattel. You know, it's a capitalist film that's, you know, anti-capitalist. Didn't know how I feel about that, but it was all right. I had a fun time. I hope you guys did as well. Those are my thoughts on Barbie, at least.
Yeah, I think like everyone else, it was before the movie even started. As I'm sitting in the theater, it's very clear I'm not the target audience of this movie. So I kind of just tried to. So when it first started, I also have no understanding of the source material at all. It's not like I'm seeing a Ninja Turtles movie where I grew up playing with the toys and can kind of understand what's accurate and what's not. But I do think I did like the first 20 minutes for what it was. I thought it kind of felt like the toy movie element didn't bother me because I actually do like toy movies. And it felt like someone playing with toys and felt like it was made by someone who played with them growing up. And I like the surrealism element of how it never felt like it was ever grounded in reality and was just kind of going all out with the surrealism. But yeah, I think like everyone else said, once we go into the real world and it loses kind of the charm of what I liked about the first 20 minutes, the film really lost its spark, at least for me. And you know, then I think we kind of go back to the Barbie world, but they just really didn't recapture that magic of the beginning, where I think it really just got kind of dialogue heavy. And I understand like this movie's made for kids, so it's going to be a little more service level with its messaging compared to, you know, something like Greta Gerwig's other films, which aren't really as aimed at kids like this one is. But I think the problem is more of how dialogue heavy it is, in terms of it kind of just unloads on you so much at once without, like, I think when they used it more in the voiceover, it worked a lot better. But when they're just talking at you, it felt more like a podcast to me a little bit, rather than like also the characters weren't super active. So that's kind of where it started to lose me. But overall, I mean, when I left the theater, I'm kind of looking around and just seeing how many people probably haven't been to the movie theaters who are now coming back to it for this movie. So even though, you know, I didn't really love the movie and didn't connect with it on a personal level, I do think it's going to have a very positive effect on cinema. And, you know, obviously there's the concern of that. It's a corporate movie, and is it going to lead to more bad corporate movies when Greta Gerwig goes on to do other films and it becomes a little more Marvel-y, let's say. But I think, you know, it's bringing a lot of people back to the theaters. It's making people up their marketing game. So I do think it's going to have a positive effect. And even though the comedy didn't necessarily land for me, I actually don't really think it landed for the theater crowd I was in. But I think, if people are having a fun,
It was going nuts, dude.
really, the comedy hit for your theater.
Yeah, like every joke. Like the conversion rate for me was probably like 5%, and the theater must have been like 80%. Like they were just cracking up, man. I was like, all right, I guess I wasn't the target demographic, clearly.
There were a couple of people behind me that was laughing at every single line possible, and I gotta say the Zack Snyder jokes and the Godfather joke were pretty funny. They did get some good laughs out of me. That was actually quite funny to see. But yeah, comedy as a whole, just really 50-50.
Yeah, the game wasn't great. Ryan Gosling was definitely like a great comedic character.
Yeah.
One of the best like working today in terms of comedy. Yeah, but there was like one other guy in the theater with me. We were just me and him cracking up with the Ryan Gosling, and then everybody else laughing at the other jokes. But yeah, I think I don't know if it was like with you, Oscar, but I think like UK audiences don't laugh or like make noise that much, at least compared to like the US or Canada. So I think there's also
I forgot to say this earlier, but at the end of Oppenheimer, everyone stood up and clapped. That's the first time it's ever happened to me at the cinema ever. Never had that before.
Yeah, I've never seen that before.
Really?
Yeah,
I saw.
we got first day applause, second day no applause. Barbie surprisingly got no applause either.
No, it didn't
Never.
for me.
Usually people clap, but a standing O, like never.
Definitely seen it. I think it was. I've probably seen it
my first
twice. Or was
my
it?
first Oppenheimer did get an applause, but that was it.
But yeah, definitely great theater experiences for both of those. It brought more people to the movies, and that's what we care about. So big weekend for cinema, massive W.
Do we have time to run through quick rankings of Nolan, or
I could go through some Nolan ranking. Yeah, so at last place in 12, we've got The Following. It's just a film that never really hooked me. It's very obviously his first feature film, and there's a lot of signs in the script of his brilliance. Yeah, it never really hooked me, and I found it pretty forgettable overall. Number 11, I've got Insomnia. I watched that for the first time recently, actually, to complete filmography just before Oppenheimer. It's a decent detective mystery with a great cast. We've got his name, like the cast carries the film most of the part for it, and it's a remake of a Norwegian film, so it's a bit weird because it's kind of set as if it's set in Norway, but it's set in the US. But yeah, it's just not really up to the standard that Nolan would bring later on, and I mean, it could have been made by anyone really. Didn't really feel like a Nolan film for me. Number 10, I've got Dunkirk. That's probably quite low for a lot of people. From this point on, I think all the films are really good. It's certainly a unique war film, highlighting a key part that isn't really talked about enough. And there's some great scenes, but then again, where there's like no dialogue and it kind of lacks the character arc that I think that Nolan doesn't really have in a lot of his filmography. Number 9, The Dark Knight Rises. I think it's easily the weakest of the Dark Knight trilogy. It's filled with quite a lot of questionable writing and moments, but it's still got the magic that they brought with his Batman, so I still enjoy it a lot. I think it's like a 4 out of 5 still. So it's still a real film that I really like. Number 8, I've got Memento. A very unique screenplay exploring non-linear storytelling for the first time in his career. It's the first instance of the objective-subjective scenes that we see in Oppenheimer, so it's he's come back to that. But I think it lacks quite a lot of rewatchability, and the others have, so that's why it's at number 8. I've got 7, I've got Tenon. It's probably a deeply misunderstood film in his filmography. It's got a deconstruction of the action film, and I think it delivers a lot of the best action scenes in his career. It's filled with crazy choreography, and it's got a time-bending structure, but yeah, Tenon can be quite confusing at times, but once you get past that, I think it places in the top half of his career. Number 6, I've got Batman Begins. Definitely one of the best superhero origins ever made. Marked her transition into a more serious Batman in the on-screen movies, with a more serious tone, and although it's not my favourite Batman film, I think it's a welcome addition to his filmography. Number 5, I've got Inception, a film that contains one of Nolan's best casts, I think. It's got a lot of mind-bending cinematography and a lot of story. Be kind of confusing for some audiences. This may be quite low for a lot of people. But I don't think Inception quite hits the highs of my other 4. Number 4, I've got Prestige. This is the start of his filmography, or the point in his filmography where I think it's on like a great level. I think every film from this point I have it 4.5. Prestige is one that definitely could go up on a further watch because I think I've only seen it once. And it's quite a unique entry in his work. It's not quite like the action films that he usually makes, but it's also got an amazing cast and delivers one of the best plot twists that I've ever seen. Number 3, you've got Interstellar, one of the best sci-fi films. It took a lot of inspiration from 2001, which I think is Nolan's best, our favourite film. Yeah, it's filled with a lot of emotional scenes, probably the best of his career. It's the first instance of him using physics into into his screenplays, which I really liked. But yeah, again, it lacked the character work. I think that took it to the best of his work. Second, look at The Dark Knight, a film that I've loved since I seen in the theatres at 8 years old. Heath Ledger delivers one of the best performances I've ever seen. Bale's many people's Batman's, is many people's Batman, which I always hold close to my heart for that. But on a rewatch, it just wasn't up to the standard in my head. Yeah, it just may not be the best Batman anymore, but there's no denying that it's one of the most influential comic book movies of all time. And yeah, and then of course number one, we've got Oppenheimer, a film that hasn't left my head since I seen it on Friday, Saturday, and then Monday. And I don't think this is recency bias, because I think this really is Nolan's best film by far. As somebody said earlier, I think it definitely is his magnum opus. And yeah, I don't see this getting topped this year, and it's again already in my like top 30 of all time. So yeah, it's my Nolan ranking.
Cool.
Good list.
Yeah, it is a good list. So I still haven't seen Insomnia or Following. I need to get on that. So I've just got 10. So in 10th place, Dark Knight Rises for me. It's at a 3.5 at the moment. I haven't kind of rewatched kind of this Batman trilogy in a while, but I just don't remember loving this. I don't think the story is as strong or as compelling as The Dark Knight, and I think it's an unfortunate step down from The Dark Knight. And it's a solid trilogy as a whole, but yeah, like a lot of people have said, like the hand-to-hand combat and like the fighting in the streets and the last act of this film is pretty embarrassing. But yeah, in 9th place, Batman Begins, which is probably quite low for a lot of people. It's a pretty solid origin story. For some reason, I watched this, the last of the trilogy. I watched The Dark Knight first, The Dark Knight Rises, and then Batman Begins. But there was massive time gaps between I watched that, because I just watched films when I was younger. Yeah, Batman Begins, solid film. I think it has a big villain problem. I think that's what kind of is the big lacking thing there. There's a lot of confusion between the kind of villains in that film. Then number 8, I've got Dunkirk. It's a really impactful film. I love the way the story's told. Kind of, you got the land, sea, and air. Although I just compared to his other films, it's not as compelling, especially compared to kind of not really. You can't really compare the two, to be honest. But yeah, I don't have it as high as some other people do, because I know a lot of other people rate it really highly, actually. Then number 7, Tenet, easily his most misunderstood film. Loved it since the first day I saw it. First cinema experience back from pandemic. Loved it then, and I still absolutely love it now. I've seen about 20 odd videos explaining it. I just love deconstructing it every time and just find something new every time I watch it. It's a technical masterpiece. I listen to the score constantly. It's just so good. Then number 6, Inception, another one. Tenet was my start at the 4.5. This is another one. The characters are a bit lacking in this film, but this film is just visually incredible. I think the story is really, really compelling. Score, obviously, is absolutely incredible. Kind of, obviously, Time, probably my favorite score of all time. I think Oppenheimer's score as a whole is better, but Time is the best track that's in a Nolan film for me. Then number 5, Memento, just such a fascinating watch. Love the way the story is told, obviously kind of similar to Oppenheimer. Now, and the mystery unfolds, just gets more intriguing, and it needs a rewatch for me, but it's so good. Then also 4.5, and my last of the 4.5s, we have The Prestige. Like Ryan's already said, one of the greatest plot twists of all time. The cast is absolutely brilliant. Scarlett Johansson, like a lot of Nolan films, is quite underwritten in this film. I think Nolan has definitely struggled to write female characters in his earlier films, but yeah, this is great cast. David Bowie's amazing in this. Hugh Jackman, Christian Bale, incredible. Then number 3, The Dark Knight, a film that has dropped slightly on my Nolan rankings recently, just because I've been thinking about the top 2 more. A film that I've loved since I first saw it. It's just, I do need to rewatch it, but it's just such a great story. Obviously, everyone knows Heath Ledger, one of the greatest performances of all time. It does need a rewatch, even though I do think it could go down and rewatch. Then number 2, Interstellar. If you'd asked me what my favorite film a year and a half ago, I probably would have said this. Time has changed, and I have watched a lot of more movies since then. This has just gone down and down on my favorites list, but it's still there. It's still a 5-star for me. Characters definitely lacking slightly, but I think this is just a technical masterpiece through and through, and it's just visually stunning. I know a lot of people don't love the ending. I really, really do. I think it's just such a beautiful way to kind of wrap everything together. And then, obviously, you could call this recency bias again, but Oppenheimer might easily number one for me, just his combination of everything he's been working on.
Good list. All right, Alex, did you want to take it away?
Yeah,
You have 10 as well? Are you missing 2?
I also have 10. The 2 I haven't seen are the same as Oscar. Following.
All right, well, give us your 10 minus those 2, I guess.
Start us off at 10. Some people might not like this, but Batman Begins, rewatched in theaters recently, might be my worst theater experience of the year. I think it's a generically dog shit movie, if I'm being totally honest. I was bored out of my mind. I couldn't wait for the movie to end. I like the Batmobile chase, but other than that, that's about it. Didn't like it as a kid, don't really like it now. Up number 9, Dark Knight Rises. This one I haven't seen in years, so I really don't have like a sharp enough memory of it to be completely fair, but I didn't love it at the time, so that's number 9. Number 8, Tenet, a film that also I don't think is really fair because I've only seen it once. It's definitely the type of film that needs to be seen twice, and I just didn't really get it. There was nothing I really connected with about it, so it just didn't leave a huge impact on me. I'm sure if I get the chance to watch it again, it'll probably go up. Number 7, I have Inception, which I remember loving when I first watched it back in 2010. I've rewatched it twice this year, once in theaters, and been kind of underwhelmed by it. I think it's a good movie, not a great movie. I think it's solid. I like movies that are dreamlike and surrealism, but I don't think it really kind of leans all in with that. I think it takes a more scientific approach, which some people might like, but it's not really for me. But like I said, still a good movie. 6, I have Dunkirk, which I just saw for the first time in theaters recently. It's kind of underwhelmed by it. I like films that are low on dialogue and much more picture heavy. So I was very excited for this one. I like the spectacle of it, and it was the practical effects. It was a very impressive feat, but I don't necessarily love it. I didn't connect with it a ton as much as I had hoped I would. Still a very good film, just didn't necessarily blow me away. I have Memento, which I think is one of his most inventive films from a storytelling perspective. I love the way he uses the black and white versus color. I think it's a very creative indie film when he was starting out. So I think that's just a very impressive film on a storytelling level from Nolan. Now we're getting into, I think, the top 4, which I think these top 4 are top 4 for a lot of people, and kind of like the real top tier of Nolan, in my opinion. Starting off with The Prestige, which I think, aside from Oppenheimer, might be the best script Christopher Nolan's ever written. I think we don't really talk about him a lot as a writer, even though I think his writing is, at times, even more impressive than his directing, and this is definitely an example of that. Obviously, great ending, great performances. Just a very interesting film, very intriguing throughout the entire runtime. Then I have at 3, The Dark Knight, a film that was one for a very long time. I think the Batman has kind of deteriorated my experience of it slightly. I still think it's a very strong script and some great visual storytelling from Nolan. It asks his audience a lot of very difficult questions and makes a lot of very difficult decisions within the film, and very strong conflicts. Obviously, the performances are legendary, iconic. Very good film, just not quite the effect that it used to have on me, at least. Number 2, a film I was holding out on for a while because I wanted to see it in theaters. Finally got to see it a couple weeks ago in theaters, and that's Interstellar. Truly epic. I like movies about space, epic scale, and just a great, phenomenal score, which I think was easily the best Christopher Nolan score until Oppenheimer came out. But yeah, Interstellar was a great theatrical experience. I can't wait to watch it again. And then at number 1, I have Oppenheimer. We just spent nearly an hour talking about it, so I don't feel like I really need to explain this one. But that's my rankings of Christopher Nolan.
Good ranking.
I'll forgive you for that.
Thank you.
I've just realized that I'm so on the outside looking in here. You guys had pretty comparable lists, I say, but mine is very different. Very different. I think there's 3 definite tiers in his filmography, I think. The bottom tier I haven't seen, so I won't call it the bottom tier. But I'll throw Tenet in there. We'll start with 10. Tenet. It's a mess. Couldn't tell you what happens. Didn't like it. Thought it was, I don't know, not it. I'm definitely going to have to give it a rewatch, though, especially because it's getting traction on social media again. And then I got Memento, same thing. I haven't seen it in probably 7 years, so it's probably due for a rewatch. It's just, again, didn't really connect with it as much. And then 8, I got The Prestige. I actually watched it for the first time this week, not too long ago. I guess the plot twist, in the least pretentious way possible, I kind of saw it coming. I don't know, like if I was just late to the party, I just wasn't fully in tune with the twist. It was a good twist, but I don't know. 7, Dunkirk. I really like Dunkirk. It's definitely a different approach to storytelling, and I think it's definitely got its idiosyncratic perks for sure. 6, I got Interstellar. Again, pretty low on this list. I don't have the same bond that a lot of people have with Interstellar. I saw it in theaters when it first came out, and I loved it, but it just never really stayed with me as it stayed with some people. So a bit lower on my Nolan rankings. And now Batman stand up, because we got Batman Begins at 5 and Dark Knight Rises at 4. I think Rises is overly hated for no reason. It's got one of the best villains, and it's just a really good movie. And then same thing for Batman Begins. The villain isn't as great, but the character piece, the opening for the Batman series is definitely fantastic. Those still high on my Nolan list. And then the top 3 are kind of like the last tier. So those like 4 through 9 are like all really, really good. They kind of stand in a tier of their own. And that is Inception at 3. Blew my mind when I first saw it. Still think about it from time to time. Oppenheimer at number 2. We just spent 45 minutes talking about it. You know how great it is. And number 1, The Dark Knight. I didn't forget how good it was, but clearly you guys did, because it's sacrilegious that this is not number 1 on anyone else's list. The Dark Knight's one of the greatest movies ever made. So I'll stand on that hill. But that's my Nolan list. A little bit different than the other guys. But yeah, Christopher Nolan's a damn good director.
Hold on, I just need to say for the record that I am an absolute Batman stan, and that is the reason why I have it so low, because they're Dark Knight's a good movie, but none of them are good Batman movies.
Damn. I don't know. I disagree. I think they're good Batman movies, man. I think they study the Batman character well. I mean, this is the debate for another time. Maybe we'll do like a Batman ranking video
right now, but I am an absolute Batman stan.
Awesome. Well, those were our Nolan rankings, our Oppenheimer and Barbie review. Please let us know in the comments your Nolan rankings, and give us your thoughts on all the movies we talked about today. But is there anything else we should mention, gentlemen?
Just like, follow, subscribe, all that shit.
All the good things. Let us know what we can do to improve. But thanks for tuning in, and that was fun.